Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Rader, and this is a teacher-facing video for participation in government examining the unit on American democracy. And we're going to look very specifically in this video on the performance task for the Amicus Brief. And I want to start by just looking at this document, the day by day for this unit, and just speak through some of the highlights of the unit for you if you haven't looked at the overview of the unit yet. In terms of breaking down the first page, we look at what we're learning, why we're learning it, where it's leading. And then there's a synopsis of the amicus brief, the summative assessment that students will be putting together in terms of their brief on a very recent case in the 2021 court year to the Supreme Court of the United States. And we're going to take a look at the student-facing version of the amicus brief, along with some lessons that are going to help you supplement your teaching of this part of the unit to help students get ready to write this amicus brief. On the second page is very useful in terms of breaking down the 24 days of the unit into 3 mini units on measuring democracy, US democracy, and the courts and democracy, along with components of the project-based learning task that students will be doing over the course of the unit that will get them ready to do this amicus brief. And then as we continue through the day by day, what's really nice is that it breaks down for our digital curriculum both the focus question and then instructional tasks that you can employ both synchronously and asynchronously. And all of these are linked to Google Slide presentations that you could then use in your classrooms. So all of this can be found in your Google Drive, available on the New York City Department of Education's Teach Hub. And we're looking very specifically at the PBL extension on Friends of the Court. So when we look at the performance test that students will be putting together, they'll examine the essential question of how do we investigate contemporary Supreme Court cases to understand and influence legal arguments and decisions on our democracy. And in extension A, when they look at the model amicus brief, as you can see noted in a comment in the Google Doc, students will be introduced to the performance task itself. And this will be a really good opportunity for you to read through the document with your students, perhaps engaging in a read aloud and addressing any questions or concerns that students may have in a synchronous environment, whether that be over Zoom or if that's in person when school buildings reopen. So looking through the summative assessment, students will identify a pending or a potential Supreme Court case. We'll use the OIA's website as an introduction in a little bit to show you just possible cases that are on the docket right now. And then in terms of showing students additional sources that they refer back to, when defining the amicus brief, it will be helpful to refer to Unit 2 Extension A for very concrete resources for your students. When looking at the completed assessment, for the cover page, it may be useful to refer students back to Unit 2, Day 19, the resource on reading court cases for a sample cover page for court overviews. And in terms of the 4 sections of the amicus brief that they'll be putting together, take a look at page 5 in the model, the Young People's Amicus Brief in support of plaintiffs in Juliana versus United States, found in Extension A, which we'll also take a look at in this video. And the assessment is broken down into these 4 sections, looking at the interests of the amici curiae, the summary of the various arguments that are being put forth, the argument itself, a works cited page, and a signature page. And if a student doesn't remember the Chicago Styles citations, you can refer them to Purdue OWL, which does an excellent overview on how to cite sources for research papers. And then review the tips for successful amicus briefs with your students. And just to put as a comment as a reminder, students can very easily get overwhelmed by actual amicus briefs. So one of the things that I point out to my students too, just to reassure them, is that the length of their brief will be substantially shorter than the samples that we'll actually show them. So just some tips to consider. And this is the reading the court cases document, which is also discussed in other videos. And it's very useful for students to learn how to read them so that they understand who the appellants are, the appellees are, which court ultimately decided the case, what previous courts previously heard the case, the parties that were involved, and the questions that are before the court when it deals with the topic. So this is really based on two different lessons that you're going to want to discuss with your students, looking at the model amicus brief, which is day A, and really thinking about what is an amicus brief, along with examining the performance task and examining the sample brief, and really thinking about for your students how reviewing the model amicus brief will help them in their own thinking. So when going to the hyperlink, we see the young people's amicus brief. It provides us an abstract and it also gives us the option to either download the paper or open the PDF in the browser. Now, the first time you go to open the PDF, it will likely allow you to do so. But the second time you do so, it may bring up a registration wall, which is what's happening here. And if you want to just tell your students, they can click download without registration, and then they can get full access to the document. So this one provides us a sample amicus brief, the title page breaking down the court in which it was appealed to, the parties that were involved, along with some information on the brief. I would recommend that you have your students look at the table of contents because it breaks down all four different components that they themselves will have to do in a much briefer format, but it'll identify the individuals involved in this amicus curiae, the summary of their arguments that are being involved, along with conclusion and certifications, their signatures that we would see as related to the signature page in the amicus brief that they themselves will be putting together. And then I'd like to show you for day B, which I think will be useful as well in this overview video, is to help your students to identify the upcoming SCOTUS cases that may be most useful for them in their ongoing research. So when I go into the first hyperlink on the OIA's website, we can see that for the 2020-2021 term, for based on the current year, we see a variety of cases. And what I would point out to my own students, and I would recommend that you do the same, is for every case that we see, so for example, Americans for Prosperity versus Becerra, take a look at the little blurb underneath the case, see if it's something that the students may be interested, that they would like to explore further. If they choose to do so, we can always open the case in a new tab. We can continue to scroll through and see the kinds of cases that are being argued in front of the Supreme Court. So when we look at the tab, we can see, in this case, Americans for Prosperity versus Becerra. We can see who the petitioner is, who the respondent is, in terms of if the case has been decided, if it's not yet, if the case is pending. And we can see information about the facts of the case. That kind of gives us the foundations. Maybe this is something that the student may want to pursue in their own research. And we can think about the key question that the court would look at. So in this case, does the policy of the California Attorney General's office requiring charities to disclose the names and addresses of their major donors violate the First Amendment of the US Constitution? And that's something that you could use to assist your students in figuring out if this is a case that they themselves would want to explore in further depth. And just some note to teachers to kind of cap this video. This extension is adapted from the Civics for All curriculum, specifically looking at the Friends of the Court, which you could find on page 135. It's most effective if you do this after completing the unit of study. But in particular, they will certainly need to have completed day 19 before they can really do this. And it is best if they do it after day 24. And just looking at the overview of this lesson, we'll have students identify their cases and be able to connect the constitutional issues in the case to characteristics of democracy and how that could then be used to support their arguments that they'll be using to support their claim and position as it relates to this Supreme Court case. All right, thank you everybody for your time, and I look forward to our next video in this series.